is Danielle Klisch. I'm working for UNESCO. I'm the secretary of the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. Today you'll hear a lot about that in the sense of what type of commitments governments around the world have taken in order to promote different values, and in this particular case what we're going to talk about today is human rights and fundamental freedoms of expression, information and communication that are necessary in order to have a diversity of cultural expressions. The title of our first panel this afternoon is Reshaping Cultural Policy for Artistic Freedom. And some of you will receive a copy of this publication here, which is called Reshaping Cultural Policies. And basically what it does is it explains the convention and the different goals that we are all working towards, whether it be governments, whether it be civil society, organizations, whether it be the artistic community, cultural professionals, to achieve certain goals. And one of those goals is to promote human rights and fundamental freedoms for artists and cultural professionals. Another goal is to ensure participatory governance for culture. That means that civil society and artists and cultural professionals enter into a dialogue with governments to shape cultural policies for the future. And we've had some very good experiences here in Indonesia over the past year, trying to bridge this dialogue and to create new policies for the future, which are based on these specific goals. Another important goal of the convention is to promote the free movement and mobility of artists and cultural professionals, especially from the global south, and to ensure that there's a space for voices from artists and cultural professionals of the global south in those marketplaces and spaces, not just marketplaces, but also independent spaces where ideas can be exchanged also from the cultural scene and cultural perspective. So this is what you will find in this publication. Today, as we said, we will focus on policies to promote artistic freedom. After this panel of eminent policymakers, we will have another panel involving artists to try to discuss this subject from the two different perspectives. So without further ado, I would like to introduce, first of all, Mr. Arif Rehman, who's going to deliver a speech on behalf of the Minister of Education of Indonesia. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I think we have got to thank God the Almighty that we can all summon in this room, and I believe that this meeting, this gathering is so important to the development of human beings around the world. First of all, the Ministry of Education and Culture, Professor Dr. Muhajir Effendi, would like to apologize to the committee due to a very short notice of another national commitment. So he asked me to deliver his material. So I will start, should be over there. Reshaping cultural policies for artistic freedom. Yes, next. So UNESCO 2005 Convention on the Protection of Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. Culture in its rich diversity is a source, asset, and inspiration for development. It is the fourth dimension or pillar of development alongside social, economic, and environmental considerations. And UNESCO 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression is the only cultural policies instrument at that time I think now we have new development at the global level which deals with policies development for the promotion of diversity cultural expression. This convention builds on the principle of respect for human rights, fundamental freedom, in other words, freedom of expression, which is a prerequisite for true cultural diversity. And this convention is also to create an enabling environmental for which artists, cultural professionals, practitioners, and citizens can create, produce, disseminate, and enjoy services and activities. The diversity of cultural expression is a source of creativity and innovation, and also a force for social inclusion and participation. Therefore, we must protect and promote the diversity of cultural expressions, since it is a precondition for vibrant and dynamic cultural sectors. In promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedom of expression, information, and communication is among the core guiding principles of the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions and the 1980 Recommendation on the Status of Artists. The freedom of expression for artists can be understood as a complex area of issues for policymakers. It is our job or our duty to ensure that the freedom of expression for artists should be respected and protected through the policies and measures as determined by each country as well as by other countries. The 2016 session of World Press Freedom Day, held in Helsinki, Finland, adopted a joint declaration reaffirming that artistic and creative expression as an integral part of human rights to freedom of expression, which is critical both to the development culture and to the functioning of democratic society. This welcomes the important steps taken by UNESCO to enhance global monitoring in the areas of artistic freedom, gender equality, civil society participation, and challenges in the digital age. In Helsinki, there was a discussion also to encourage further discussion of the tools needed as part of our national, regional, and UNESCO normative system. And 2017, in reshaping cultural policies for artists' freedom, our discussion panel of ministers of cultures from the Asia-Pacific region is not only to forward the Helsinki discussion, but will also put our efforts to attain the SDG 1610 target on public access to information and protection of fundamental freedom. In our two-day discussion, the governments are expected to make the appropriate steps to promote artistic freedom, covering gender equality, state civil society collaboration, and the unhindered movement of artists, as well as providing artists and cultural producers to share their insights. Now, there is an overview of Indonesia cultural policy context. The Indonesian government under the President Joko Widodo has put culture to be the high priority position as a platform to strengthen the diversity and unity, social reconstruction in the development of the nation's character through education programs as mentioned in our National Term Development Plan. I'd just like to share with you, we have about 785 languages in Indonesia and more than 1,500 tribes existing in Indonesia to be able to live in one nation. The Indonesian government key objective in its implementation covering the following measures: increasing government's awareness and participation in cultural program initiated by the public in improving an appreciation towards cultural diversity. Cultural diversity, we have a motto in Indonesia called Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. So it's cultural diversity in unity. Providing adequate infrastructure for the development, studies, and presentation of arts and culture in the major cities and capital regencies in the form of facilitation, support, and award for artists, respect for artists who improve the standard and quality of arts and culture, and developing arts such as fine arts, performance art, media art, and others, cultural-based creative industries, as well as adaptive and interactive national film industry, increasing new positive value. This measure is embedded in the National Medium-Term Development Plan for 2015 and up to 2019. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have put also a certain amount of budget for this. So the House of Representatives make sure that the development of culture has enough money to go ahead. With further emphasis on the development of culture-based creative industries, especially in improving appreciation of arts and creativity. In the integration of culture in the national sustainable development policies, we consider culture as a strategic element in sustainable development policies as the national level covering. We also follow the motto from UNESCO that culture is the enabler and the driver of development, of the sustainable development. So the integration of culture into overall national development planning, that is strategies, policies, and action plans. The integration of culture into poverty eradication, social inclusion through education and training strategies. The provision of equitable treatment of disadvantaged individuals and groups and social groups, including women, to participate in cultural life and men. But I like also to correct, not including women, we also have some men who has got to be helped in our society. As you know, that in some part of Indonesia, we follow what we call the matriarchat society. So the women decide almost for all the development. The equitable, the distribution of cultural resources between require urban and rural areas. We have some questions today. How can government action create and sustain a climate encouraging freedom of artistic expression throughout the cultural value chain from creation to access? What are the specific cultural policies and measures required to promote gender equality, civil society partnerships, and greater mobility? How can artists benefit better from preferential treatment measures? And how is globalization affecting the status of artists and artistic practice? Last but not least, the fourth question will be very appealing and challenging for governments and the artists to work together in bringing about the best future policies and measures in cultural policies for the national development. This theme in promoting artistic freedom throughout the cultural value chain, from creation to access, is a very challenging agenda for all of us. We all understand that in achieving SDG 1610, we will face some challenges that we have to work together to ensure the success. We hope that through sharing and interventions today, we will be able to have the Asia-Pacific, not only Asia-Pacific, I think around the world, mutual agreement in achieving those goals. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's the end. And thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
It might be the end of your speech, but I think it's the beginning of a very long and challenging conversation and agenda that you've set for us this afternoon. So thank you, and please thank the Minister on our behalf. We're sorry you couldn't be here, but we are very happy that you could come and issue this challenge to us this afternoon. Every panel, every issue has a story, and you've just ended your story with a challenge for mutual cooperation in the region, the Asia-Pacific region, around SDG 16.10 on fundamental freedoms, which is our topic today. In 2012, in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, there was an important ministerial conference on regional cooperation to promote the diversity of cultural expressions, which resulted in the Dhaka Declaration, which called upon the ministers working together with civil society to promote this convention on diversity of cultural expressions and in fact promote regional cooperation. So from Dhaka we went to Helsinki, as you said, and now we're in Jakarta talking about how to make those connections between the diversity of cultural expression, artistic freedom in the digital age, which was discussed by the Nordic ministers of culture in Helsinki, and now in Jakarta, making those connections to see how we can promote a cooperation within the region around fundamental freedoms in the arts and culture. So I would like to ask and invite the Major General Kabir, who's here representing the Minister for Culture of Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. In fact, I would also at first apologize on behalf of our Honorable Minister that he could not attend here due to his unavailable circumstances. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am here to deliver the initial talk what Honorable Minister has prepared. Please allow me to do so. I am delighted to be able to contribute to this UNESCO side event on cultural policies and artistic freedom held on the occasion of World Press Freedom Day. As Minister for Cultural Affairs and a performer and a former activist of Union for Artistic Freedom myself, I wish to express my admiration for all those committed to defending human rights, to advancing freedom of expression. Art is no luxury. It is the deepest level of human expression, the spontaneous overflow of creative freedom. It is a universal language to help us find common ground and beauty. It props up on long-stretched values, intellectual traditions, lifestyle, and culture in latitude of freedom of thinking and expressing. Art has also the extraordinary capacity to express resistance and rebellion, protest and hope. Artists definitely entertain people, but the important thing they do is they contribute to develop the mental health of the people of the society. Some artworks sometimes create social debates, oppose decisions of government, but the validity and artistic creativity is necessary for development of vibrant culture, for the functioning of democratic society. Critical voices come in many forms, and art has always been critical voice in society with tremendous impact beyond both public and public discourse. And yet, the rights of artists to express themselves freely are under threat worldwide. Every year, as statistics show, artistic expressions in the form of books, films, musical genres, and paintings are censored or attacked. While such threats and restrictions to artistic freedom all run counter to respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, recent findings point to the fact that violations of artistic freedom are underreported in comparison to threats to journalists and other media professionals. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right for all people, but often artist freedom are threatened. As documented in the first global report by UNESCO's 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, entitled Reshaping Cultural Policies, many people in the world today are subjected to restrictions on their artistic freedom of expression and are censored, denounced, persecuted, and killed. We must fight for these freedoms that are key to build participatory and transparent systems of governance for culture and help to increase the mobility of artists, especially from the global south. UNESCO's 2005 Convention reminds us the importance of ensuring freedom of expression for artists and cultural actors, and how a rich and diverse artistic and cultural life can create positive change in the process of developing modern democratic societies. This convention stipulates that promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of expression, information and communication is a prerequisite for the creation, distribution and enjoyment of diverse cultural expressions. Recognizing the diversity of cultural expressions is therefore critical. Back in 2012, as already said by the Madam, the ministers and representatives of governments from the Asia Pacific region adopted the landmark Dhaka Declaration on the diversity of cultural expression. This declaration was very strong of commitment from our region to implement the 2005 Convention, ratified by Bangladesh as early as February 2007, and its core principles. In this declaration, governments pledged in particular to facilitate the expansion and enhancement of culture and development initiatives, exchange and collaboration, ensure the free circulation of ideas and works, create conditions conducive to the production and dissemination of diversified cultural goods through the cultural industries at the local, regional and global level, develop platforms for cross-sector dialogue and cooperation with civil society to ensure the active participation of a diversity of voices in policy making and implementation processes, facilitate the mobility of artists, creators, cultural entrepreneurs, and encourage North-South and South-South exchange programs within the region. 10 years after the adoption of the Convention, it is important to look back and see what has been achieved and what are the challenges faced. Importantly, many countries are now looking at the artistic freedom as a global issue for sustainable development. This was well encapsulated in the Declaration on Artistic Freedom in the Digital Age, adopted last year in Helsinki by Nordic Ministers of Culture, which states that artistic and creative expression as an integral part of the human right to freedom of expression is critical both to development of cultures and to the functioning of democratic societies. Today, we can try all together to take this debate forward, hear new voices. I mentioned the importance of freedom of expression, but I should also mention freedom of movement. We know that creativity and innovation are vectors of development, but we also know that mobility has become an intrinsic part of artists' life. Artist residences play a key role in this development. For example, as they provide artists with time, space and context for cultural exchanges, practice, encounters. Mobility, free movement also give a chance to access international markets, disseminate work, participate in international exchanges, etc. This, of course, requires simplified measures on working visa procedures, work permits, tax income legislations, as well as mobility funding schemes. In Bangladesh, we are taking steps to encourage contemporary creativity and cross-border exchanges. Dwelling on Dhaka as a long-standing place of innovation within the arts, I am pleased to announce that the next Dhaka Arts Summit (DAS) to take place at Bangladesh Shilpakala Academy in collaboration with the Ministry of Cultural Affairs will be held on 2nd to 10th February 2018. This third edition of Summit is looking towards South, East as well as North and West, and will initiate an unprecedented dialogue between South and Southeast, encouraging cross-border collaborations. It will include a new section, Bearing Points, which are large-scale thematic presentations of artists and architects that serve the audience, the viewer, towards lesser explored cultural histories of the region. In keeping with its status as research platform rather than a biennial, the Dhaka Art Summit is also formally launching research fellow program, assisting leading professionals with an interest in South Asia by inviting them to travel to and conduct research in Bangladesh prior to the event, as well as to propose contributions to post on MOCA's online resource devoted to histories of modernism and contemporary art in a global context. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Dhaka Art Summit 2018 is designed as a forward-looking initiative that generates possibilities for artists living and working in Bangladesh today. And this is most important. In promoting artistic freedom, we must seek to support creativity and maintain a heterogeneous world of ideas, values, and views. Throughout the region, we have witnessed over the past decade the emergence of creative economies which reinterprets the traditional values of the past while producing exciting new ideas, products, and designs of the future. Whether in the film, music, or visual art sectors, the Asia and the Pacific region have their rich and diverse cultural assets that live and are communicated through a flourishing contemporary art scene. It is also home to a significant number of creators, artists, communities, and dynamic cultural entrepreneurs, as will show the panel of artists this afternoon. There is a growing demand for locally produced creative content. Against this background, Bangladesh welcomes the important opportunities to work alongside more countries in the Asia Pacific. Together, by ratifying and implementing the 2005 Convention, we can demonstrate our commitment to culture, creativity, and innovation, to promoting local culture and creative industries, but also to ensure respect for principles of the Convention, such as freedom of creative expression. We can also send a clear message to the international community that governments from the region are ready to put the culture at the heart of the development by engaging in international cooperation and investing in the promotion of a diversity of cultural expressions. This is particularly critical given the implementation of a 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. This conversation, in a way, started in Dhaka 5 years ago. However, we must make sure that all steps forward are taken together and include the voices of all. There are enormous opportunities to make real change, to work towards putting in place the mechanisms needed to enable the cultural sectors at all levels to grow, develop, and prosper, to provide contemporary creators with the opportunities to have their works recognized and compensated, and to ensure that consumers and the audiences across the globe can benefit from and enjoy the diversity of cultural expressions emanating from this dynamic region. Thank you for your kind attention, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. These words are especially precious for us considering that Minister Noor is a filmmaker. So introduce to you a video message that has been prepared on this occasion from the Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers. You both referred to the Helsinki Declaration, so he will share some words with us from the video screen over here, but also just to say thank you again to the Danish government for making all of this possible today, tomorrow, and the day after, because we have many sessions. This is the first one, the opening one, to discuss these different issues of artistic freedom, which of course is not a simple idea that can be solved in a 2-hour panel. So thank you for starting this off. So here we are, the Secretary General. Thank you.
Ministers, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, greetings from Copenhagen. It's my privilege as the Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers to wish you all best of luck in your endeavor to make today's conference at UNESCO World Press Freedom Day in Jakarta a success. Jakarta is an important milestone in our efforts to make the discussions on artistic freedom a global discussion. I'm therefore very glad to see that the Nordic Ministers' Declaration from Helsinki is taken forward by Ministers of Culture from the Asia-Pacific region. Today's event is expected to bridge the gap between policymakers and artists, bringing all stakeholders together and to mobilize networks for action. To enhance global monitoring on artistic freedom, we need state parties, artists, civil society actors and media professionals to join forces and to bring their views to the table on trends and challenges and possible next steps. Your discussions will inspire the strategic direction of UNESCO's future action on this important topic. Speaking in more concrete terms, I've learned that discussions today are expected to feed into the development of civil society recommendations during UNESCO's NGO Forum on Artistic Freedom in June. I have also learned that your discussions will provide input to UNESCO's training module, which is to be developed in order to train governmental actors, civil society stakeholders, unions and associations of artists on how to address artistic freedom within UNESCO's normative framework. Finally, Jakarta discussions, I believe, will contribute to a new chapter on artistic freedom in UNESCO's next global report, Reshaping Cultural Policies, to be launched in December. While we all celebrate the World Press Freedom Day, artists and journalists should use this opportunity to join forces, to share views and experiences on media diversity, freedom of expression and artistic freedom. Artists may be inspired and learn from existing media monitoring tools. I'm very happy to be able to wish you a fruitful discussion and an overall continuing inspiring conference. Ministers, distinguished guests,
It was such a beautiful message, we could hear it again. So now we're going to move on to the panel, and we have our good friend and colleague Anupama, whose very capable hands I will now leave the chairing to, and take these discussions forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon and welcome once again, everyone. As Danielle Clich has introduced, this is the first of 2 conversations this afternoon. And this first conversation will look at reshaping cultural policies for the status of the artist and for artistic freedom. We have heard from Pa Rehman and Ambassador Kabir that promoting fundamental freedoms of expression is a prerequisite if artists and cultural producers are to make engaging works of art, and if we as audiences are to be able to enjoy them. And that fundamental freedoms of expression are a core guiding principle for the 2005 convention that we have already spoken about and for UNESCO's 1980 recommendation on the status of artists. However, having said this, we must also acknowledge that freedom of expressions for artists can be a very complex area of policy making because it has to ensure that the economic and social rights of the artists are protected. And on the other hand, it must serve to guarantee their freedom of association and their freedom of movement. And to discuss these very complexities, we have with us a panel representing governments, policymakers, officials. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce the two panelists that you have not heard from before. We have Ms. Nguyen Phuong Hoa, who is the Deputy Director General from Vietnam's Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism. And we have Mr. Bunta, who is the Deputy Director General from Cambodia's Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts. And so to kickstart our conversation this afternoon, we do not have any PowerPoints for you. So we're hoping to have more of a conversation and to put some tough questions to our panelists this afternoon and discuss some more challenging areas in policymaking. But to kickstart the conversation, I was going to invite our panelists to maybe give us an overview of where things stand in their country and what specific policy measures are being implemented in their countries to improve the status of the artists and to promote artistic freedom. Perhaps we can start our journey with Vietnam. And maybe I could start by asking you to also tell us a little bit, how are artists perceived in your country? What is their social status? And from the side of the government, what is being done, has been done? What is your vision?
So thank you very much, Anu, for your introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very honored to be here to share with you the Vietnamese culture policy and measures regarding the promotions of the status of artists and the artistic freedom. And as we have heard about the convention 2005 and also from our previous speakers, that freedom of expressions of artists is among fundamental human rights. And in Vietnam, we build our laws and our cultural policies based on these perceptions. And in our new constitutions in 2013, we recognize, respect, and protect cultural rights of citizens. And it is stipulated that everyone has the right to creations of literature and arts and entitlements of its benefits. And it is also written that everyone has the right to enjoyment and access to cultural values, as well as the participation in cultural life and the use of cultural institutions. And from that, the government of Vietnam issues the national strategy for the development of Vietnamese culture in 2009. And in the principles that culture is, the spiritual foundations of the society, and culture is both the goal and also the vehicles for social and economic development. And the national strategy of Vietnamese culture development toward 2020, which was approved in 2009, set out, 5 objectives, and in which the third objective is to set free or liberate vibrantly the creativities and the creative potential of each and everyone, and maximizing the creativities of intellectuals, artists, professionals, cultural professionals and practitioners, and providing training for talents in the art and culture sector, and develop policy measures and infrastructure to create high quality artworks. So that is our goal. And in which we also see it is very essential to establish, grassroots democratic institutions that encourage and facilitate every citizen to take part in cultural communities' practices. And it is important to respect and promote freedom in artistic productions and creations, and encourage new findings and new values as well. So it is not only heavily support the traditional value, but also look for the contemporary or newly created value. And in that strategy, we also mentioned the missions to consolidate and reform the operations of artist associations. That is a kind of civil societies in Vietnam. So we need to consolidate the role and the operation of the artist associations at all levels, at the central level and also at the local levels, so that it can improve its capability to represent artists and promote creativity. So that's one strategy, the national strategy. And regarding the status of the artists, I think basing on our laws and our strategy and policy, artists, they have a very good position and in the society. And for long, we established the system of granting titles for artists. We have the People's Artist title or Artist of Merit. That is the state honoring, honorable titles given to artists who make their life contribution to the arts and culture. And of course, we have, you know, some social insurance or healthcare insurance and some welfare associated with, you know, artists who are granted with that titles. And at the same time, we also have some training projects for the young and emerging artists. So in 2015, the Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism approved 3 projects to provide training and nurture young talents in the art and culture sector, and in which we will reform our curriculums as well as, you know, we give some scholarships for our young students and teachers as well to go abroad to study further. So there are some examples from Vietnam.
Could I now turn to Cambodia to maybe give us again a similar kind of overview on the status of the artists and perhaps some measures that from the side of the ministry you have been promoting?
Thank you, moderator. First of all, I would like to thank UNESCO at first for inviting us here, and then Honorable Professor and Ambassador, and all participants here. My name is Bunta from Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts. I think we are today in panelists. We have only 2 countries, and we are ratified the convention. And Vietnam and Cambodia, we share the geographic, and so it's unfortunately we want to hear more. I plan to learn more about that. But today I would like to, according to the moderator, I would like to share what the Cambodia situation and what is Cambodia on the art promoting. And as you know, that Cambodia is, I can say that we are quickly to ratify all the UNESCO convention. And we ratified the convention in 2009. We didn't now not yet established as a specific for the policy, no, it's a cultural law specific. But after ratifying 2005 convention in 2009, 1 year later, we are established the cultural policy, called Policy for Culture, and very beginning time, and from now it's we view from 2014 to 2018, and with the help of UNESCO office in my country in Phnom Penh. And in terms of the ratification, we still have a lot of challenges, especially it's maybe you know that the interpretation of the 2005 convention It's not only referred to the Transnational Convention, but we are start from 2000 Convention on the safeguarding plan on the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. Because we are Asia from long time, we are really experienced from the colony everywhere. And then after that, the independent movement we have started our own institutional tradition, and so its interpretation is not clear anymore. Especially, I think that every 4 years for the report, maybe you know it, report on Transnational Convention on the expression. And this is a very most difficult every 4 years. We just finished the report to the UNESCO. And in terms of this, Cambodia, it tried to, we are set the main mechanism for, it's not only direct to the nationwide on the, put on the important lights, but in the Ministry of Culture, we try to encourage all the artists, especially if we are on the capacity building. And this is our main target, to build for the capacity building for after, you know, after we have several decades of the civil conflict, war conflict. And so we try to bring it up from the artists, especially 20 years ago. After this war finished, we try to pick up everywhere from the artists, you know, and in every level. And I'm agree with the Mr. Huang from Vietnam. And we also have a lot of exchange, even geography, even sharing history. And we also reflect all each other, because even we have shared ethnic minority, also tribal. So sometimes artists, it's just quite similar. So that we have discussed it through, maybe later we'll exchange on that. But in our policy, cultural policy or policy for culture, we are trying to elevation on all the level of artists to be more upgrade and more, you know, sustain for their career and for practicing. And this is based from their own knowledge. This is what is the Cambodia do for every level of the art and artists of from this. That's a movie. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Would our panelists from Bangladesh or Indonesia, would you like to come in and say something at this point?
Ladies and gentlemen, please, I would humbly remind that I'm an ambassador here. The cultural portions are to be covered by the gentlemen, those who are sitting with you. You can ask them. I have just read out the views of my minister. I'm not maybe competent enough to dwell on the difficult and critical subjects which you are dealing with. So you can ask the gentleman just sitting in front of you and the gentleman sitting beside him. They are the representative of the ministry and the cultural affairs force. They are much more well educated and equipped to reply to you. Thank you, ma'am.
Would our colleagues from Bangladesh like to jump in and following the thread of what we have heard from Vietnam and Cambodia, maybe in a minute or two, give us a sense, how is an artist, what is the social status of the artist in Bangladesh, and what has the government been doing policy-wise, legislation-wise, schemes, measures that support artistic freedom and the status of artists?
Thank you very much. I am ATM Siddiqur Rahman, Deputy Secretary to the Government of Bangladesh. I am very fortunate enough that I have the opportunity to talk in this August session. I convey special thanks to our His Excellency, our Ambassador, sir, along with you all. We all know freedom of press is very vital matter in respect of every countries. As if we have freedom in respect of press in any country, whatever it may be, our accountability, our sincerity is to be ensured. In Bangladesh, we are enjoying full, absolute freedom in the field of press. Our journalist, our reporter, they are also enjoying. They're making report in any field, whatever it may be, politics, whatever it may be, scientific research, whatever it may be, administration. In every field, they are making reports without any fear. They have got freedom. Press also includes radio, television, our others media, like who are delivering pitch in front of public, who are delivering reports to the newspaper. They are also enjoying very much. In the field of culture, Bangladesh, you know, we have diversified culture. We have a heritage, we have a traditional culture in the South Asian countries. Our culture has got, that is, we have a rich culture in the Asian countries. Cultural field like culture, everything, what would be the lifestyle, what would be the manners of life, what would be our delivering of speech, what that is our how to lead our livelihood. Culture is a vast subject, not only how to deliver speech, how to make, how to exchange views with others. That is, we are Bangladeshi and we are Bengali in the Indian subcontinent. We have a rich culture as Bengali, also Bangladeshi. In the cultural side, our performers are enjoying much. The culture in the like actress, our dancing performer, our singer, they are also enjoying in their occupation. Like I think if you consider freedom in the cultural side, I think we have diversified history, we have a rich opinion, we have our expression. That is, I think we are very much happy in delivering our cultural freedom, cultural side.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Could I bring in Shahidul Alam, who is a very well-acclaimed photographer from Bangladesh. As an artist, Shahidul, how do you see social status of the artist, and how do you see what government is doing, has done?
Okay. Well, thank you, Anupama, for the opportunity. Well, thank you, my colleague, for making the statement, because you've actually made my work a lot easier. Had anyone sitting where you are said that people have full freedom to do anything from any country in the world, I think the audience would have been skeptical. Even Denmark, who's promoting this event by supporting it, had it been the Prime Minister of Denmark sitting where you are, saying, in my country people have full freedom to do whatever they want, I think people in the room would have been more than a bit skeptical. So I think one of the things we need to address is the gap between the rhetoric and the practice. You have said very fine things on behalf of the Honourable Minister. I'm a great admirer of the Honourable Minister. We've been activists in the streets. He's been a cultural activist, not a filmmaker, by the way, an actor, very fine actor. However, right now, I do not see him as a cultural activist or an actor. I see him as a minister. I see him as a representative of the state. And I see the difference between the cultural activist I used to know in the street and the person who's now the minister. This is the nature of things. And the Honourable Ambassador sitting there spoke, and as you did, from a government position. And I think all of you, broadly speaking, said very, very nice things, things that I completely agree with, except that I don't believe them. And there lies the problem. I think here, sitting on an official capacity, you make a statement based on an agenda, based on where you come from, based on what directs you. You do not have the freedom that I do, because I am not paid by you. I am not beholden to your government for my survival. The problem is elsewhere. The problem is, as an artist, I have to find a very delicate balance. As if I were to see myself as the piper, I want to play the tune I want, and I also want to get paid for it, which makes it complicated. And the issue is, in countries like mine, the biggest benefactor is usually the government. Therefore, we cannot ignore the government. Even if we want to be critical, even if we want to challenge it, we still need to come back to you. And I will say, I myself, I run probably the best known festival in our region, and we used your facilities to show our work. This year, for the first time, we started in 2000, we will actually hopefully be getting financial support as well. So it means, in a sense, we're beholden to you. We have to be nice to you. We can't be too critical to you. Even in places like this, I have to be a little bit careful, because when I go back, you will be saying, oh, Shahidul was out there, and he was saying those things. So, you know, there is a careful balancing act. But I do have a few problems which I do want to specifically mention. I found it ironic that a Major General was talking about artistic freedom in a forum such as this. Yeah, you are here not as a Major General, you're here as an ambassador. Fine. But let me just bring out a little thing that happened in Bangladesh some days ago. I'm not talking of the killing of Cholis Richil, that's a different story. I am talking more about the first Chakma language film in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, you mentioned that we are a nation of Bangalis. We are predominantly Bangalis, but we are not only Bangalis. We have people who speak other language. We are predominantly Muslim, but we are not only Muslim. We have people who are mostly heterosexual, but we also have people with other sexuality. And I think it is worthwhile remembering those things. And when you talk about, in those terms, about us being Bangali, you, through that statement, wipe out the small other languages who are struggling. And my country was born on the basis of the right to speak its own language. Yet, within Bangladesh, we have the language of other people being actively suppressed. And the first Chakma language film which was produced in Bangladesh, it should have been celebrated. It was banned. It is being shown worldwide. It is being shown in film festivals. Within Bangladesh, it is banned. I find that problematic. I don't need to say a lot more. I think people can read between the lines.
Thank you, Shahidul, for highlighting some challenges when we talk about national policies, national plans, and how they may or may not be then translated into reality. Pa Raymond, would you like to add something?
Yes, I just would like to share with you that in Indonesia, we try to maintain the unity of Indonesia by having a philosophy, not only for culture, but also for politics and for economic development. we have what we call by Panchasila, the 5 principles. And this 5 principle is respected, and it becomes the core and the boundary of any development or any freedom. When we talk about freedom, there should be a limit. You know, how far can we be free? Yes. Number 1 is that it should respect the what we call by the belief in God. So when we have groups who do not believe in God, so the government and the society has the obligation of not but believing in something, believing in the life of the day hereafter. And number 2, humanity. So these are the poles of any freedom, including artistic freedom, that it should promote humanity. And number 3 is democracy. Now, when we talk about democracy, we had the history in Indonesia that we call it by the democracy that is limited by the national interest. So there is no an absolute freedom. And the last one, that any kind of freedom should take care of the social advancement and social balance. Today in this room, I have Mr. Amanwira Kartakusuma. He is the national expert for UNESCO 2005 convention. Mr. Aman, could you stand up, please? So he is backing up this discussion. Also, we have Aryudi Saputra from the, Mr. Aryudi, could you stand up, please? Yes. Mr. Aryudi Saputra is taking care of a very peculiar institution. It's called the Institution of Creativity. It's very, very interesting. And Mr. Hartanti Maya Krishna, Madam Maya, could you stand up, please? Yes. Madam Maya is taking care of culture in the Ministry of Education and Culture. To conclude my intervention at this junction, I just would like to share with you our problem today is not to the past, but to the future. You know, a lot of the younger generation is very difficult to accept that cultural freedom is limited to our philosophy. You know, some of the youth, they really would like to have absolute freedom. If they want to make dance performances, you know, you have got to take care, you know. Where are you going to perform this dance? Are you going to perform this dance in a very religious society? You have to take care of your clothes. You have to cover some, you know, a certain part of the body. You know. And the future problem is so acute because we have also culture from other countries coming into Indonesia, to this younger generation. Now, I like to hear more probably from you. Do you have this problem or not? But yes, in Indonesia we do have the problem of what we call by freedom, including artistic freedom. Thank you very much. I will stop over there.
Thank you, Paraman. You have raised some very difficult questions related to policy making. And I want to pick up on some of the threads that we have heard and maybe also hear from our colleagues from Vietnam and Cambodia. One is the question of national identity and how art is expressed in national identity, the challenges between the traditional forms of art and more contemporary forms of art. And we've also seen that how does, from the side of policy, because you have both laid out that there are national policies, national strategies to bridge the gap between traditional and contemporary, to support both, to ensure freedom, but we've also heard that there perhaps are limits to these freedoms. So in your conversations with the artist community, with civil society, what kind of trust and confidence building measures are being taken from your side to have this consultation with civil society, to hear their side of the story, as we have heard from Shahidul, and how does this impact or shape policy, and what have been your challenges, therefore, at the national level in responding to these issues, because perhaps some of these issues are also issues that come up one way or another in your countries. So how has, from the policy making side, how have you responded to these issues and built bridges with the civil society, with artists?
I would like to just, if our Honorable Minister would have been here, I don't know, there would have been a heated debate going on in between two very renowned person of our country. I would just like to point out one thing here is that all that glitters are not gold, definitely. And we always see from our point of sight, there is always the other side of the river. So as a government official, I can assure this August gathering that not only from the government point of view, our Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, she is the daughter of the father of the nation who fought for our country. So she is trying her heart and soul to do whatever she can, but all are there to support her and her ideas. And definitely I have heard her a number of times about the freedom, what we all are talking here, and how far the freedom should be exercised. The point here, Mr. Shahid, he has brought out, I would just like to tell you that we had a very, I would say that not a very happy experience of fighting insurgency in a place called Chirong Hill Tracks for decades long. And how we have done that as a soldier of my background, I know that. So there might be some quite of, I would say that, feelings of different nature once these things comes up in a public forum. So the government knows better why that film was not shown. That explanation is with them, but I feel that the subject with which we are discussing now, our government is taking quite a good number of steps. May not be up to the expectation of all, but definitely they're taking good strides. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Could we come back to you in a moment when we hear also from Cambodia and Vietnam?
So regarding your questions about national identity, actually it is our utmost goal to build a Vietnamese culture. It is what?
Yeah, maybe bring it
okay.
to
Okay. So it is our utmost goal is to build a progressive Vietnamese culture imbued with national identity. So national identity is the core heart in our culture development. However, we think that it is not the way that we close the door and define ourselves that it is our national identity. No, we think that we open our doors, and in our journey to encounter with new culture in the globalization process, that help us to identify who we are and where we come from. So I think that I don't see a big threat from globalizations or the influences from foreign cultures to us regarding the national identity. But on the other, in another direction, we see that on the way to integrate into the world, we find ourselves. So that's why I would like to touch upon one issue regarding the mobility of artists. That's why in our policy we support cultural exchange and we support our artists to go abroad. But at the same time, we opened our doors to artists from the world to come to Vietnam to join our international arts festivals so that our people, they can have an access to the world culture.
Thank you. It's really difficult. We are talking about national identity. I think that every country, every nation, they give many interpretations. But in terms of Cambodia, I would like to concentrate on what is the promotion, on what is the on artists. In Cambodia, as you know, that we have very strong tradition from, like you see, the Onco civilization is a strong one. Sometimes we are referred very deeply on that, you know. So our artists are very proud with that time. So that we still to develop for the promote for the contemporary or anything. We always basics on the thing, you know. I'm not talking about the convention, I'm talking about the real situation. And we are after the Khmer rule, the old master is still with few number. At that time, we are really, they still keep the mindset to promote the new development or the promotion. But so now when we try based on the 25 convention, and we try, we are Ministry of Culture, we are not work directly because, you know, we are very small, we are small population. And artists is mostly in our hand, the Ministry of Culture. Even we have some NGO, we have some association. Now it's 5 years ago, we have many private sector for art and for the association, NGO especially. They get the fund from various funding from Europe, from America, something. So that we are left them to move freely to do, but we just give on guideline, for example, based on the human rights part and on the 2005 convention. We also refer some small in 2000 convention on safeguarding tradition before we develop into the modern tradition or apply for any contemporary. This is what is Cambodia doing now. It's my role, myself, and when the NGO come, they produce some contemporary, some performance. We are not strictly, we just ask them sometime, we can say that we cannot do directly so that the freedom of artists, the NGO, like what they are, and monitor, you know that the company Living Art is the big art and they have some many fun from outside. They are also go outside to perform connect for the exchange program. And this is what we are support them. If sometime, like I agree with the Dr. Rachman, it's sometimes it's the young, they are very absolute free. We want free anything, you know. We are very sensitive on the part of open anybody, something like that. We are Buddhism. We are Buddhist. Sometimes we still like that. And I refer to the Dr. Raman also. We also have in Buddhist also we have Panchasila also. We refer to the young generation on to refrain them about Panchasila, about the future is not more, you know, accept for anything. I would, in terms of 2005 convention, also our policy, we are really open on, especially in Cambodia, we are celebrate New Year 3 times. One is the Chinese New Year, and for Noel on Christmas also, and then for the our New Year, Khmer New Year. And this, nobody can separately, but they are enjoy with the holiday. And so enjoy, everybody enjoys for that, you know. This is what is the kind of the participation. We are not really discriminate on that, you know. This is what is the, what Cambodia doing that. And in terms of exchange, like we are closely bordered with Vietnam. We have, according to government agreement, bilateral. We also have exchange the performance. 1 year we go to Vietnam, and another year Vietnam come. And in terms of budget, sometimes we didn't have, Cambodia have not enough budget. We ask Vietnam government to support again. Then this is what is the feeling. It's not based on budget, on money, but it's based on cultural exchange. And in film field, also film festival, we are cooperate with every embassy, because embassy in Cambodia, and we have strong connection. We bring like Indian embassy, like Russian embassy and Vietnam embassy. We have all the film festival. We call film cultural week for film and something like that, you know. This is what is the thing that I think can share. It besides of the, I'm really, we are government. I agree with what our Bangladesh colleagues. We are really have some framework for work for the government, but we want to really talk with you privately on the outside the table. This is very important for me to push what we are working for culture. We are working for the people. We are not working for culture, but we're working for human. Basically, you can see every convention, they are start from human rights and then cultural rights, and then we go every section of culture. And according to, I would like to moderate a few minutes. I see that after the Dr. Brahman, they just recommend me, a very good word, some word I can read from artist freedom, mobilize the following, right? The handle of the right protect under international law. We have some point, you know. 1, the right to create without censorship or intonation. The right to have artistic work support and distribute, remunerate. And 3rd one is the right of freedom to movement. The 4th one is the right to freedom of association, and the right to protection of social and economic rights, the right to participate in cultural life. I think it's the very basic one, and so this is the human. Every is not depend on law, but it's natural that the people can be accept for every. It's not only the private or the sector of the cultural policy, but it's every people can accept for that idea. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunta. So I want to pick up on one point that both of you raised. Of course, art is an area where meanings are contested, and so there will be contestations. You mentioned just now that it would be good for ministries to also have informal channels of communication with the artists, so you will chat with Shahidul over coffee and understand his part of the story. But in your countries, are there channels, formal or informal, either structured dialogue or informal dialogue, where it is possible for the artist community to raise these issues with the ministry? It may not always be possible to do this in a public forum, because as Ambassador also pointed, things can get heated, but there must be channels to keep the communication going, and that is how policy evolves. So from the side of the government, is there an initiative to stay connected with the arts community? Are there forums, consultation platforms? What exists now, and what is, do you intend to have more such platforms, or is this a challenge, having this dialogue with civil society?
So there has been a consultation platform in Vietnam. Whenever we have a new policy, it is by law or it is our regulations that we have to consult with the targeted groups. So we have, from the ministry, we hold, frequent consultations with the artist associations. But, frankly speaking, sometimes we think that maybe, you know, the voice from the artists associations cannot represent other views of independent artists. So we create informal dialogue with independent artists as well. And I would also like to share with you our experience. We have a project entitled Dialogues Among Policymakers and Opinions Makers, funded by the Danish government for the last, 10 years. And every year, we hold annual workshop on selected themes that we think that we set priority to build policy, or we want to initiate new measures to support that sector. And then we invite, policy makings, managers from ministerial level and also at provincial level to join the workshop together with, people from artists association, independent artists, media agencies, and also people from research institutions. So we create two-way dialogues so that we can really hear the concern of the artists. And we hope to bring it, recommendation, into our policy revision.
Mr. Bunta, you mentioned Cambodian Living Arts, which is a very well-known NGO working in the arts and who presented the Season of Cambodia in New York in 2014. And they have also been initiating these art forums. So I was wondering, is these art forums, which are now just started in Cambodia, is that, which I know that the ministry also supports, is that perhaps a forum where conversations like what we have heard from in Vietnam can take place? Can difficult issues be raised there? How is your ministry communicating with artists and hearing their feedback?
Okay. I think that this, as I said, that Cambodia is a very small population. And so even the big NGO that we are qualified on the art promotion, and especially in the contemporary, concentrate on contemporary, like you mentioned, in very famous in US in 1914, I think. Yeah, this is we are working closely with that NGO, Cambodian Living Arts, on that. Sometimes all the artists, what they are using is all this government stuff, all the artists from Ministry of Culture. That is, I think it's true during the restriction something, or so not real, the real restriction. We are government, sometimes we are really take care about the tradition, It's not exposed more beyond that what if we have. But on behalf of this, the NGO can do so more in terms of, we use only one artist, one group artist, but they can represent two kinds, for the tradition and also for the contemporary. Like when they go to perform in outside, sometimes they have to contemporary. So that's very important for us that we come up with the forum. With what is the importance of the artist? What is the interpretation of the artist? What the value? Because artist is the interpreter for for identity, for the tradition. I think it's very good in terms of, for example, extreme peace. For example, we are ministry. Sometimes I'm not go directly to work with the critical, but I go silently with the outside informal discussion. I think this part maybe we can how to reduce what like the Professor Rahman said, that it's not too much open on that. I think that I want to share this time the very famous. We are really claim for one the film movie star, the lady. Maybe this one is. I'm really direct to connect with to warning her. Because we meet her for 3 times, but is this not her problem? This is our problem. It's not really deliver her to understand enough for the value of tradition before she go beyond more for outside interpretation. That is, we are really warning, but it is another another literature for the work for the government. But my personally, I'm really, you know, we are not good enough to tell her about what is the freedom, you know, what is the value of the tradition. This is what is our experience. Also, we can, especially maybe last year, we have a big art forum, and this is come from around the artists from free to discuss on that. But I'm not present there because I have an admission outside, but it's very fruitful. And so ministry always encourage and also support, legitimize all the NGO and for the art, for the freedom for the artists. But especially now, it's I think last 3 years, our government tried to encourage our ministry to, it's not term of budget, but in terms of activity, to promote, as our Prime Minister said that, oh, active have to promote, but we have to promote by life, you know, by economic, by freedom, it's everywhere, you know. And so that's now a Ministry of Culture try to raise many benefit for the artists to be performed for their own way. But we are correct some part of the moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think channels of conversation exist, but they are not easy conversations. And ministries have carried certain burdens, including those of national identity and contested meanings. And I think, from what I understand, conversations are happening, but the challenges do remain. At this point, I also wanted to, somebody from the audience, Pa Aman, you wanted to come in on this question? Okay, then maybe I will come back to you in the Q&A when we open the forum for discussion. So we leave this topic here, and I wanted to pick up on the other question of international, of globalization, and of mobility that we have spoken about. We do understand that, you know, mobility or the movement of artists is critical to their practice, is critical to their artistic freedom, but it is not easy. There are not often much funds for travel, and visa regulations can be quite difficult. And so mobility, though important, is not as easy to achieve in reality. And here I wanted to ask you, do your governments directly support the mobility of your own artists? And how does it work also in the ASEAN region? There is some preferential treatment for your artists because it is possible to travel without visas. So what kind of preferential treatments have your artists received? And in terms of mobility, what are some things your governments are doing to enable greater movement of artists? Please, Pareman.
After a long struggle and a long effort, the culture established what we call by the constitution of culture. So at the beginning, even the artists, you know, the cultural society, they go against in establishing the cultural constitution, Undang-Undang Kebudayaan, because they think that any rules and constitution will limit the artistic freedom, you know. But and then when was that, Bapak? The cultural. Okay, maybe Pa Aman can proceed from here. I need someone to back up my intervention on how, not limiting, but we make a rule on the cultural development. And this is because we are facing more than 1,000 languages. We have more than 800 cultural values and tribes. So we have this dimension. Pa Aman probably can help me on that.
Yes,
Thank you.
Pak Arif. Anu, I think after listening the debate and the conversation among the panelists, I would like to share with you what Pak Arif has just said, that Indonesia is very fortunate. On the April 27 this year, after 35 years of struggling, finally the parliament adopted the very first new law on advancement of cultures. So we are very fortunate that in this context, this law has been inspired by so many issues, covered under the Convention of 2005. So all those issues about the freedom of expression, human rights, and also the mobility of artists, everything covered under this new law. For example, I would like also to mention the specificity of this law, specifically mention about the access and engagement of the community, civil society on the cultural products and process, and also the cooperation among the regional provinces in our case, and also the nation. So it means covering also the international cooperation. But the most probably interesting topics on this law is covering the inventory, security, maintenance, safeguarding, publications, development, utilization, and also nurturing to the artists and to the community. The role of authorities, the central government, the local government, is also covered under this law, which they have special effort to advance the culture in terms of database. So database development is also very important in this new law. Well, on the issues on this mobility and also the artists, I think there is one chapter covering what they call it the recognition. So under this recognition, they specifically mention about incentives and also facilities. So now under the law, government obliged to provide facilities and incentive to the artists. Another commitment also by the government in the new law is on the finance. So financing coming from the national budget and also from the local budget. So again, talking about the financing, it is now under the commitment of this law, how to support the cultures. And cultures considered by this law as an investment. So it's not a cost to the society, it's just investment. Another interesting articles under this law is on the prohibition. So when I was reading the law, what's prohibition? What's prohibitive in this law? There are two major issues prohibited under this law. The first is on the destruction or destroys of the infrastructure of cultures. So no one making some unlawful action to destroy any facilities, infrastructure of the cultures. And the second one is on the issue on the function of database system. So anyone doing the unlawful things to make the database system dysfunction is become unlawful. So the sanction also is quite scary actually, because any these unlawful things can be put under the penalty in terms of money up to 10 billion rupiahs, in terms of imprisonment it up to 5 to 10 years in the prisons. So I think under this new law, Pak Arif, again this is a good, it's a very refreshing to our cultural activities in the country, because now it is protected, it is also support to develop and encourage to establish the mobility among the nation for the artists, including the attention and the recognition in terms of incentive and also the facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Aman. I think we're kind of running out of time, so if you will agree with me at this moment, maybe it's the perfect time to open the floor for some questions. Danielle, would you like to kickstart with some questions? Yes. Yeah, I'll come back to you. Just a moment. Can we have the other microphone there to...
Let's let Ole ask his question
Thank you
first,
very
and
much.
then I'll come after.
My name is Ole Wright. So I think if we stay here the whole afternoon, we will see that there are two very different versions of how reality looks like. So I hope the panel stays for the discussion with the artists. But now we're here to understand more how you think and how you practice. So I have a question for my good colleague from Vietnam and one for my good colleague here from Jakarta. In Vietnam, there's been a practice of imprisoning artists. There was a singer-songwriter who was recently released after 4 years in prison for making a song which was critical to the government. You do have a pre-censorship system, and I know we should not talk about individual cases, but I would like to hear you talk a little bit more about how that system works and whether there is a way that artists can discuss pre-censorship with you. And for my colleague here from Jakarta, I just want to point out that when we talk about freedom of religion in human rights standards, it has two rights. It's the right to believe and it's the right not to believe. So maybe you could talk a little bit about something else, because if we talk about religion, this will take a long time. But you said that you had certain standards for what is not allowed. And do you have any reflections of who is defining what is national unity, who is defining what is proper dresses, and do you discuss this with the artist in an open environment, and do you have any complaints mechanism? Thank you.
Danielle, is there something you'd like to add? Any other questions? We'll take a few questions and then our panelists could respond. If you could also introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
Hello, Adam Pushkin from British Council. I wondered if we've heard a lot of good words about freedom of expression, and following on particularly from the last gentleman and the gentleman from the filmmaker from Bangladesh. It feels to me that the true test is how governments behave towards artistic expression that governments don't like. And that all governments around the world are faced with quite a lot of artistic expression that by its very nature they don't like, and that is running counter to what the government might want or what the government might think. And how can governments put in place infrastructures that can ensure that artists who want to bite the hands that feed them are able to do so? And I'm interested, perhaps very similar to the last gentleman, Arif, you mentioned that democracy must, in some cases, be limited by the national interest. I wondered who defines what is the national interest, and whether, perhaps, if it is the government that defines what is the national interest, is the government necessarily an impartial arbiter in that case? Does the government have all the wisdom to define what constitutes the national interest?
Interesting question coming from England, I guess.
Any other questions, comments? Q Choi, if someone could just bring the microphone across.
Hi, thank you. I'm Q from Korea. Yes, there's always, as our colleague mentioned, the big gap between actual policy and practice. We all know that. So how we juggle as a producer or as a policymaker, as an artist, whatever, whoever we are. But my interest in the reshaping the cultural policy for the artistic freedom, how in a policymaker, government, evaluate yourself. many times as an artist or as a producer, we evaluate many measures. So who evaluates government policy for the reshaping, and what process do you have? I mean, our Vietnamese colleagues a little bit mentioned about, so how you evaluate your cultural policy for reshaping.
So perhaps we could take this round of questions. Swa, would you like to start?
Thank you very much for all the questions, all the very challenging questions, especially the question from our colleagues, Mr. Olaf from Denmark. First of all, regarding the case you mentioned about a composer who put in prison. Actually, from the ministry, we didn't have the report about that case. Last night, when I received the report published by Free News, I saw one case in prison of artists put into imprisonment, reported from Vietnam, and I thought, is this the case from a performer, a Vietnamese performer, who went to the United States and he was caught there due to his the conviction of child abuse, and he was put into court there and put into prison by the United States government, and so I thought that was the case. But now when you speak out, it's not the case. So we will talk separately about that, but from history, we don't have any information about that. So I think that in order to put one person into prison, that person shall be, go on a trial, go to court. So it is the judge who decided that imprisonment. It's not the government, or it's not the people from the management or administration who do that. Regarding your second question about censorship mechanism, yes, in Vietnam, as in many other countries, now still we apply the pre-censorship system. It means that according to our laws and regulations, before you want to exhibit an display for the public, or before you want to have a performance in public, or even when you want to show a film for the public, you need to apply for license from the state authority. And we have professional authority. For example, the cinema department, they win license on film dissemination or distribution. The fine art department license on the fine art exhibition, and the performing art department, they give permissions for performances. And there will be, a committee from professionals and also from some agencies sitting in that committee to review the work and decide. And frankly speaking, in the past 10 years, we don't have, cases reported about, censors work or films that cannot get the license. It doesn't mean that we allow all the artwork go through that, but it means that the applicants, they accept the decisions of the committees, okay? And during our consultations with practitioners, we do understand that there is a desire from, practitioners to have like a two-way dialogue with the one who make the decision. So they want to know more about the reason why their application cannot get through. So we hear that. And that's why in our discussion or deliberation, I should tell you that there has been a discussion or deliberation regarding the shift from pre-censorship system into the post-censorship. But this has been, a long conversation and debate. But among the policy makers and managers, we do want to enhance the transparencies in the licensing process to create a dialogue or create a mechanism so that the applicants can have petitions, something like that, to the decision makers. Actually, at the central level, I must speak frankly that we have quite open-minded approach, and we don't have, cases reported that the application is refused. But at the provincial level, the one who make the decision, they are more, skeptical. So we really want to, from the ministry point of view, we really want to encourage such dialogue at the provincial level. So I hope that I can answer your questions.
Raman, if you could respond to some of the comments. Are artists involved in these conversations about what is national interest?
Yes.
And what kinds of sort of participatory governance mechanisms do you have to hear the story from the other side?
Yes. Okay. We are on the cultural policies. If we look at the topic, and for artistic freedom. So I will not answer directly, but this is what is happening in Indonesia. The artistic freedom is very much protected, by law, and that is why Mr. Aman just now mentioned that with very long struggle, about 30 years, we could produce a kind of law on culture. Among others, we have to guarantee that culture should develop as free as possible. There are some limitations. For example, I gave you an example. If there is any cultural freedom that will break the unity of the nation, there the law will come in. And then we are going to have to open a dialogue with artistic or artist groups, that certain kind of production will hamper or will break the unity of the nation. And then the evaluation, as you also asked about the evaluation to artistic products, our evaluation to artistic product is also when we look at the richness of artistic product for making humanity to become more respected, humanity higher than the others. That is something that we have got to promote. So there are two words that control is appreciation and respect. And we avoid any effort to homogenize or to make artistic production to become one form. we have got to keep what we call by the Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, the unity in diversity. So that is our policy. If our friends from Indonesia can also help, please add some more information. But to me, this is my capacity on understanding your question. I hope I have answered or at least react to your questions. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Paraman. Just to pick up on one last question that came from Q Choi before we round up this session. Are there any mechanisms or systems in place for monitoring the policies that exist, and do artists or civil society have a say in giving input towards such a monitoring system? Anything that exists? Yeah, shortly, briefly, Paraman.
Very briefly. In our parliament, we have a commission on measuring the product of the art, and the commission is called Commission 10. We have Commission 1, 2, 3, and Commission 10 is taking care of measuring the development of art, development of culture.
And yes, please.
I just want to conclude on this. I would like to say we are all the cultural experts. And what is our challenge? I think how much we are doing best, how much you create for the culture, for the policy for culture. But I think we have to think about what is the political willing. This is important. How much we are effort, how much we put in it. Like in case of our Indonesia colleague, he said he just tried for 30 years. Also, we are all try, we are try for develop, to protect and develop the artist freedom. This is how much we fought, but it depends on the political willing. If the political life what is the section of assembly of 10 in Indonesia is not good explanation to the politician, to PMP, they will not going on. So if we are share the same like this, I think it's the big challenge is the cultural or the political willing. This is the big challenge. That's from me. Okay.
Would you like to add anything, Ms. Hua? No? Okay. On the monitoring opportunities for civil society to contribute to some sort of a monitoring system? I won't press you, so if you have, yeah.
No, I mean, as I have spoken before, that's always we have the consultation process, and we also have the mechanisms to enable not only the civil society, but any other citizen who can monitor the policies implementation. But it is true, there is a big gap between, policy formulations and policy delivery. And there comes questions of funding and budget. I mean, state budget. We cannot do everything with the state budget. So that's why in Vietnam, now it is a big question, how to mobilize, resources from outside, from other stakeholders to develop, culture industries as well. And regarding, for example, I'm back to the point of mobility for artists. And I mentioned before that we, from the ministry, we support the mobility of artists. However, we have a very tiny budget every year. So we can only spend it for our national theaters only to accomplish our commitment with other governments. For example, through our governmental agreements with Cambodia, with Laos, or with Russia, or South Korea as well. But there is a big potential, out there from corporates. And recently, we can do some cultural exchange or big festival thanks to, the support from, local authority from both sides and also corporates. And in Vietnam, for example, the Kum Ho Asiana or the CJ, they have some fun. So that's, we look forward to diversify the funding. And one thing that it is very important as well for, our non-state actors or artists to find funding for their travel. So they now, when we don't have any state-funded funds for that, they have to go for, foreign funds, and they go to BC or they go to Danish embassy or Swedish embassy to have such a travel grant. But now when Vietnam become, middle-income countries, all of the developed countries, they withdraw the ODA or the travel funds. So it is very, very difficult for, independent or non-state artists now to travel. So, yeah.
Thank you. I just want to return to our colleague from Bangladesh who I cut short before. So if you could in 30 seconds to a minute summarize your comments.
Thank you very much. I would like to add some new points. You would be happy to learn that our government recently enacted an act entitled Non-Formal Education Act under Ministry of Primary and Non-Formal Education. So through this, under this act, our government...
Sir, could I request you anything about specifically on culture?
Specific and new. Specific. Our are going to implement a good number of projects. One of the projects regarding ethnic minorities group. The objective of this project, how to make them self-reliant, how to make their mother tongue, how to ensure the existence of their mother tongue. And under this project, government introduced institution tribal area where minority community are living. In order to existence their mother tongue, government decided to provide primary education, up to primary education through their mother tongue. And this is, I think, very important for the existence of the mother tongue. One, two, in our financial year, you know, our financial year starts from 1st July up to 30th June. During this period, government of Bangladesh announced budgets in which government allotted huge amount of money to help the ethnic minority group. And the only objective of these projects is how to ethnic minority groups to be self-reliant. Good number of money are providing them.
Thank you, sir. We have run out of time for the panel, so maybe we can continue this after at the coffee break.
One of the important...
In 30 seconds, please.
Through 1 minute. One of the important points, how to ensure the existence of our culture of the minority group, to establish cultural academy in the places where our minority community are living. In this cultural academy, the minority communities are exercise their culture, they can develop their culture, and disseminate this culture throughout the country. In this way, our culture is, day by day is going to be very enriched. On the whole, our government is very aware regarding our minority community and the culture of the whole people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so I think one thing we all agree on is that the gap between policy and practice in ensuring the status of the artist and artistic freedom is indeed very wide. And it remains to be seen in different cases how far political will, which you raised, and political openness will go. Thank you to our panelists for joining this conversation on a very difficult topic in the spirit of dialogue. May this be the first of many more forums where we can discuss these difficult issues, and long may we continue to serve art. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll take a coffee break and we will be back at 4:30.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a difficult topic.
Excellent moderator. Okay.
Masih full ya, cuman tadi nyalanya emang. Ini di table. Di table kabelnya mungkin.
Bisa tapi diperbaiki dulu.
Bisa, ini kan baru dipakai foto nih bawa belum tes nih. Udah kan?
Ya udah. Makasih Pak ya.
Tes. Tadi keceklah.
exactly is artistic freedom? Well, obviously, it includes the right to create, to publish, distribute without censorship or intimidation. But when we talk about artistic freedom, and Daniel has done this previously, and in the context of UNESCO, we also talk about the right of artistic work to be supported, distributed, and remunerated. We'll also address this in the panel. It's the right to freedom of movement, the right to freedom of association, the right to protection of social economic rights, and the right to participate in cultural life. And the last mentioned right, the right to participate in cultural life, is not least important. Many people, especially women, are discriminated from taking active part in cultural life. And as you know, sometimes this is due to social or cultural traditions. We also know that that takes a long time to change. But there are states, such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, who are systematically discriminating women's rights to take part in cultural life. And that is a violation of international human rights standards and must therefore continuously be addressed by UNESCO, by the Human Rights Council, the special rapporteurs, and the treaty bodies. Let me also point out the artist's right to freedom of association. The freedom of association is violated in many countries, such as China, Egypt, and Cuba. In Egypt, the state-controlled artist syndicate decides on who is an artist and who is not an artist. And not only that, the syndicate have been giving policing power to censor artists. So you have registered artists censoring other artists. This is obviously totally unacceptable. It's a little bit like have a wolf protecting the sheep or an arsonist leading the fire brigade. When artists cannot create unions without interference, they cannot collectively address many of the problems they face, and these problems are multiple. Several countries are still not respecting intellectual property agreements, and artists, like any other skilled people, need protection for their social and economic rights. But artists in many countries, including several European countries, are now being challenged by unemployment legislations, and on top of this, lack of funding or even mind control of the funding. In March, we witnessed how President Trump, in his first federal budget plan, proposed elimination of the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment of the Humanities. And this tendency of attacking the arts by eliminating funds or controlling funds in so-called interest of the nation is unfortunately spreading like a wildfire. The 2005 UNESCO Convention and the Global Report Reshaping Cultural Policies explain very well how to promote and how to protect artistic freedom and diversity of cultural expressions. And without freedom, there is no diversity. The Global Report outlines how state parties can and should promote and monitor the convention, and it clearly states that international and national legislation related to human rights and fundamental freedoms should promote both artistic freedom and the social and economic rights of artists. And the report also provides a framework of core indicators for the implementation and monitoring. And let me also point out that the 2005 Convention provides a unique policy framework to implement Goal 16 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Political and public support of artistic freedom is more important than ever. Ministers of culture were very much involved in the creation and the development of the 2005 Convention. And it's time for them now again to speak out, as we saw with the Nordic ministers, for the protection of artistic freedom. Unfortunately, many of their colleagues around the world are doing the opposite at the moment. They're limiting and controlling artistic freedom by censoring, by threatening, or even imprisoning artists. Musicians, writers, and other artists are imprisoned in this moment. Countries such as China, Turkey, and Iran, just to mention a few, because they, through their art, express different worldviews and address issues such as cultural intolerance, political corruption, or simply express themselves with genres that the regimes don't like. So what can be done when states continue to violate the rights of artists to freedom of expression, in some cases even incites hatred against artists? What can UNESCO do? I think it's time for UNESCO to modernize its complaints mechanisms, or human rights procedure as the mechanism is officially called. There was an evaluation already in 1994 that pointed out a lot of problems with that. And seen from the perspective of an international organization such as FreeMuse, I believe that procedure continues to partly be a failure for artistic freedom, whereas it works much better for journalists. I find it's non-transparent. It needs to be modernized on the same lines as the complaints mechanisms that are linked to the UN Special Rapporteurs. I would also like to call on the current and the forthcoming Director General of UNESCO to strongly condemn censorship, imprisonment, and attacks on artists who are exercising their rights to freedom of expression. There should be no distinction between condemnation of attacks on journalists and attacks on artists. It is within the domain of UNESCO to do so. UNESCO several years ago drafted the UN Plan of Action for the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. And the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 68163 on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. I think it's now time for a UN Plan of Action for the safety of artists and the issue of impunity. I think UNESCO should take that initiative. So, finally, what about the militants, the terror groups such as Taliban, Daesh, Boko Haram, Ansar-Din, and their systematic and intentional destruction of the living arts, the intangible cultural heritage? Today I call on the International Criminal Court, the ICC, to initiate investigations and to charge well-known and identifiable leaders of these terror organizations for the intentional destruction of intangible culture in countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, and Mali. Not only are these terror leaders responsible for war crimes, their attacks on cultural life and artists are crimes against humanity. And in addition, today I call for donor countries to develop with UNESCO support programs for those artists and cultural industries that has suffered immensely from intentional destruction of the living arts. And finally, I call for the parties of the 2005 UNESCO Convention to show in action that they live up to the two main principles of the Convention: promotion and protection. Thank you for your attention. We will now continue with this very distinguished panel. And rather than me sitting presenting each of you, if you could just, with a few words, tell a little bit about yourself before we get into the real issues.
Hi, I'm Shahidul Alam. I'm a photographer, writer, and a curator, but I see myself as an activist. I'm based in Bangladesh.
I got it. I'm Rahul Chatela from India. I'm an independent film director and producer. My name is Q from Korea. I am a cultural practitioner, producer. Now I'm working UK Korea Citizen Festival, creative director.
Now let's start with one of the, let's say, not so highly tempted issues. Let's talk about mobility issues. From your experiences, could you come with some concrete examples how the problems with mobility and visas affect your work and the cultural industries as such? Would you start?
Well, I was actually quite surprised. You know, you have that thing, little pamphlet about artistic whatever it is, where it talks about how New Zealand has changed its rules and made it so easy. Well, I am the international curator for the Auckland Festival, which is at the end of this month in June. What I had to go through to try and get a New Zealand visa is absolutely remarkable. It included getting a police verification. It included all my bank statements. Despite the fact that someone else is paying for it, I had to reveal a huge amount of data to the New Zealand government, which I'm not comfortable with. New Zealand does not have an embassy in Bangladesh, so I have to then send my passport to India. So this is me having to send my passport and all that information to them. And then that whole thing, and I went in December to do a recce, and then I was going to do, I'm hoping to go end of this month to actually set up the show. I couldn't get a double entry visa, so now I have to apply again, and it's $160 each time. And of course I have to go through police verification and all those sort of things, as if my whole identity has shifted in the last couple of months. That's there. The UK charges 63,000 taka for a visa for a Bangladeshi. That's roughly $900 US.
Wow.
A lot of money for a Bangladeshi who wanted to go to the UK. These are the way it goes. Most countries, many countries have embassies in Bangladesh, but many of them have them in India. So you have to go to India. You then need to get a visa to go to India, stay in India, spend the time, if you get it. And of course, whether you get a visa or not for India depends upon how India perceives the work that you do. And because right now India has been propping up our unelected government, if you question your own government or question India in the process, then going to India itself becomes a hurdle. So that's just one of the things. But as a Bangladeshi, I pretty much need a visa to go to the toilet. So I've accepted this as standard practice. And a lot of people tell me, well, you know, you lived in Britain for so long, you know, you could get citizenship. Yes, I could get. I'm entitled to get citizenship for Britain. Why would I want to swear allegiance to the Queen because of my convenience? I mean, that's what's being suggested. Yeah. You swear that you will fight for the Queen and country because we'll make it easier for you to get a visa. But that's what's accepted of me. But to cut it short, by and large, there are two elements. One is which country, whether they accept you or not. The other is whether your own country supports you in the process or not. And if, as an artist, you are critical, which is what you should be in the first place, then you're squeezed in the middle. Last year, my partner and I, we were going to give a talk on human rights issues in London because I happen to have a residency status in Britain, so I'm not paying $900 every time. But she got refused to get a visa, and of course, when one reads her writing, one knows why that happens. And I would like to bring up your very nice introductory text, but I do have issues on certain areas. Of course, when we talk of ISIS, when we talk of Daesh or Taliban, and we critique them, I'm fully with you. But when we talk about terrorism without mentioning Blair or Bush or Obama, I have a serious issue. Because I think when we talk about all these sort of things, the biggest terrorism, the biggest threat to humankind today is imperial aggression. And I think it's a serious problem if we dissect it and clinically accept that those are the terrorists and others are not. Sitting in a country like Bangladesh, I'm far more terrorized by what the United States does than I am by what's happening by any of the other countries. So that's where I come from. Yeah?
And we'll come back to that, because I think when we come back to talk how conflicts affect artistic freedom, let's address it there. But right now, if we continue, if you want to add something on the mobility issue, so we'll take issue by issue, although they interlink somehow.
Well, to be, in 2000 and 2011, we made this film called The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which was based on a Pakistani novelist's best-selling book. And we converted that into a film, and to record 2 songs, we had flown down from Bombay to Lahore, because this particular singer lives in Lahore, and we just had 2 days to record with him. And I have a Lahore visa on my passport. Since 2012, every time I've applied for a visa to any country, including the United States, United Kingdom recently, Australia, any country, they've always asked me the reason for me to travel to Lahore. But I must say, because I'm an artist and because I'm a filmmaker, I get it much easier. I get the visa much easily as compared to a normal man who has the right to go to a country like Pakistan, because all Pakistanis are not terrorists, all Lahoris are not indulgent in terrorism. So it's much easier for artists to get visa, because it's like they've already bracketed us in the elite club. So as much as I do get questioned as to why I went to Lahore and why I went to Pakistan, I do have my reasons, and they're accepted much easily.
Thank you. In terms of, logistic, technical ways, I don't think that we had a big problem, but there are some examples, some religious region, also national government checking all our kind of scripts, and also, again, also the foreign entertainment tax issues. For example, when we sort of performed in Iran, we presented our work in Montreal. So a programmer came to see my work, and then they invited us. And then 2 months before, after we get a contract, they send sort of long email. You cannot show the sleeveless. You have to wear all the hijab, and for the female actors. So we had started a big argument. This is sort of our artistic freedom, showing about our kind of theatrical perspective. So, you saw my work. Why only 2 months before change all the costume? Also, you cannot touch a female actors, things like. So anyway, we had a company. We had a big discussion of are we willing to change and then go to Iran or not? Change some. Even though we change some costume, what we are going to tell to the audience, nothing changes. So in that case, religious reason, you have to really, if you we respect their culture, you have to respect my artistic freedom. And that's a good example. The other one is when we performed in China, and the policeman came to our rehearsal checking every single text about, if we say something free Tibet and things like that, we are in trouble. We cannot go out to China. That kind of things is really government really try to check every single things. France is interesting. We had a lot of exchange, but Korean artists is not full. A lot is not full time. It's a project based, so they don't have insurance full time. They don't have sort of after retirement things. But France doesn't allow us to provide social security, some kind of evidence. Then you have to get a contract. Every single artist had to pay almost 35% taxes, which is really half of money for the artist fee. So in terms of that kind of technical logistics perspective, artists, especially independent artists on international touring, has big issues.
We have people in the room who are definitely experts on this, and I want to bring, if you want to add something from the, let's say, the European perspective of organizing events with artists coming from Africa or Asia, and how it affects work in Europe. Do any of you want to add to this, Marianne, or yes, please? Can we have the mic? This is Julia Farrington from United Kingdom, working with index and censorship, because it's something that is debated not only in the south but even in the north. Yes, please, Julia. It's still very brief.
That I also produce quite a lot of events, and if you are going to bring performers from different countries. It just puts a huge amount of insecurity over your planning and your programming. I mean, it's a very obvious thing, but you know, it can be that at the last minute you have to reprogram or you have to cancel events that you might have been planning, and that is pervasive, I think.
Could you hand it further to Danielle? Because I want you to qualify us a little bit, Danielle, on this issue. She's sitting there.
Can I add, and then you can qualify on both of us.
This is Marianne de Vleek.
Thank you. I think that because of the migration fear in the European countries, it's getting increasingly difficult to invite artists from other places. And if we're going to criticize governments for not adhering to the convention that they've ratified, I think we should also take the Western governments to task for this too, because they're certainly not giving preferential treatment. They're certainly not promoting exchange between North and South. The political fear and the fear of politicians for some vast citizen, you know, panic about migrants is really impeding that interchange.
And Danielle, the reason I wanted to put the microphone to you is that Marianne mentioned now preferential treatment, and maybe not everyone is aware that in the convention there are specific mentioning of preferential treatment. Could you just talk a little bit about what that incorporates in regards to mobility issues?
Sure, I'm glad that you said that because I was wondering what you wanted me to qualify, in fact. Preferential treatment is actually a trade term. So this convention was the very first time that this terminology, preferential treatment, was used in the culture sector or in a culture legal instrument. And what does it mean? It means that the developed countries, I'm just using terms now because I don't like this developed, developing
where the money is.
Dichotomy. We're using more now global north, global south, but that also is not very sufficient. But sorry, those are the words I have at hand right now. But governments from the global north are supposed to open up their marketplaces, provide access for artists and cultural professionals from the global south to be able to work and have access to audiences in the global north. Now, how is this supposed to be done? This is something that we are working at defining in more precise terms, but visas, as you've mentioned earlier today, is something that is one of those measures at the top of the list. That means reducing the costs of visas, providing for something like an artist visa. There are certain regions of the world, like in Mercosur, where they've started to talk about an artist visa to promote mobility of artists within the Mercosur region. This has not happened yet from the accounts we have heard recently. The same is the case in East Africa. They're working on or discussing this idea of a artist visa to facilitate mobility of artists within the region to reduce the cost, but that doesn't help, for example, reduce the cost of the 900 euros that that you would have to pay to go to the UK. So this is what exactly it means, and what we've started to do through this global report is to monitor what's happening and to figure out where the challenges are in order to be able to talk about it, because preferential treatment, as I said, is a trade term. How does it apply to the culture sector? What is happening and what can be done? So this is what we are trying to figure out now, so thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an ongoing discussion for ages now in Europe. We did a report many years ago on visa issues and also showed that not only does the cultural industry and the artists in the so-called South suffer, but even the cultural industries in the North suffers, because if you are providing for a festival or whatever, you sometimes have to, like you said, feed in a lot of money for visas and then they may deny you the visas. So it's actually affecting cultural industries. And many festivals today decide simply not to invite artists from Afghanistan or from Congo because they know they'll have a lot of problems. And additional to that, the discussions in the EU has been manifold. The Commission actually believes that it would be much better to have a one-stop system. So you could go to the closest EU office in whatever country and apply for a visa for the whole of Europe.
What is more sort of contemporary value is more important. What my national identity value for me is sort of important. That's why sometimes national identity people sort of misunderstand the nationalism. So that gives really good image of Korea, bad image, sort of difficult darkness of Korea. That's not Korea. I don't think so. So it's really fine boundary how you sort of show national identity. So that's a sort of...
Because frequently when we talk about these discussions over censorship in countries, sometimes I tend to say, well, it somehow portrays conflicts within society. And Rahul, in India, there's been a lot of discussions in the film industry in the past couple of years over what we could call civil society threats, especially from what normally termed as Hindu nationalists in regards to films. Could you tell a little bit about that?
So, you know, the big problem is that identity can never be singular. And unfortunately, all over the world, fundamentalists, be it of any background or of any kind, try and kill your identity and turn it into a monolith. We got to realize that identity, I'm not just an Indian, I'm not just a Hindu, I'm not just of a particular caste and creed, but they try very hard to reduce your identity to just that. So when I make a film, first is of course to get the funding, which is a huge task because it is the entertainment industry and people are paying to travel to that escapist world. But once the film is done, releasing it becomes very difficult because there's something called the Film Certification Board, the Central Board of Film Certification, and it's basically a bunch of people who are under the Ministry of Information and Broadcast and decide to censor certain scenes or certain aspects in my film because they feel that that might create ruckus once it's done. Now, two things. One is that the Film Certification Board is not the censor board. The Film Certification Board is expected to just certify whether this is open to an adult audience or it is open to a universal audience or it is open to parental guidance. That's about it. But once they start asking for censoring certain aspects of the film, you don't, because we're dealing with high budgets and little time, we don't really have the time to go against them. Because it's not just me as a filmmaker, it's also my distributor, it's also other people who worked in the film who are at stake. Although I must say that and the censoring issue has happened since quite some time. I know that in the 90s, there was this film called Bandit Queen that got released, which was about a young girl from a small village in India who became a dacoit. And she came from a really low caste, but she went on to killing people because she was suppressed, and she eventually became a politician. Now that film was banned by the government and by the certification board, but the filmmaker didn't give up. He fought. There's something called the tribunal, which is a board of people who are above the certification board, who study your appeal, and they may or may not give you the permission to release the film. If that doesn't happen, if you're not convinced with their decision, you can go to the Supreme Court. And Shekhar Kapoor, who was the filmmaker of Bandit Queen, he did go to Supreme Court, won the case, and eventually released the film. What is fascinating is that the film went out to become a massive hit. So it's not like the audience doesn't want to watch these kind of films. It's not like the audience is going to create this ruckus. the problems are always by people who want to reduce your identity to one particular thing, and more often than not religion in India. But the USP of India and the biggest advantage is its composite culture.
The interesting thing about censors is that sometimes they go much further than their mandate.
Yeah.
And it's, what is difficult in our industry, if we can call that the human rights industry, is to actually get the regulations. I mean, it's difficult to argue against something when you don't have the regulations. Now, for instance, in South Africa during apartheid, there was a system with rules. So, for instance, the South African Broadcasting Corporation had 12 rules for regulating every single lyric or music. And all the products that were banned in South Africa, I mean, it was a terrible system. But to understand the architecture and the minds of a system, it's interesting to study, because every single T-shirt, every single record, book, poster, whatever that was banned was also registered. So you could actually look into the files. And only when you could look into the files, you can open a discussion, or in that case, you could actually go to court. But in many countries, you can't do that. And so to get this mechanisms of censorship transparent in itself, although it's, in my view, is illegal to do pre-censorship or post-censorship unless it violates the international human rights standards. But at least it's a start to start discussing how things are being censored, because in the mind of the censor has to understand the political landscape, and they will always be a little bit more aware. So they will rather censor than not censor. In Bangladesh, and in regards to what we talk about national identity and censorship, you must have quite a few perspectives you could add to this.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up when we do our festival, one of the absolute no-nos we have is there is no editorial control by the sponsor. And sponsors, if they come on board knowing that that's the case. However, despite all that, with the government, every time we've had it, they've sort of said, well, we need to make sure you show Bangladesh in a good light. The term that's used is bhav murti, you know, the image of Bangladesh, how you present Bangladesh. And of course, they're the guardians of this image, so they decide how that is. One of the things that's happened, which is perhaps peculiar to Bangladesh, is 1971. Bangladesh was born out of a very bloody and relatively recent war of liberation, and the present government had an important role to play in that war. But now they're milking that to its maximum. So you've got a situation where everything, if you, in whatever thing, you know, you disagree with the education policy, then you must be a war criminal. You think that marriage of underage children, girls, isn't right, you must be a war criminal. There's this very binary situation where either you support the government or you're a war criminal, which makes it very problematic to maneuver. And the reason this is happening, this is my perspective, is that we have an unelected government. The unelected government, therefore, is very vulnerable, and it requires propping up. So it uses every arm of the bureaucracy, the security services, whatever, in a very violent way to prop up what essentially is a government that doesn't have the right to be there in the first place. That includes India, because India has been very supportive of this government and has contributed to its getting elected. So Indian decisions become far more important than our decisions because they influence their thing. The other thing is, comes to national identity, the gentleman there talked about how they're doing all these things for ethnic people. Well, I just mentioned the fact that that one single film, which is about minority languages, got banned, but the fact that there is military occupation in the Chittagong hill tracts, a little bit like what's happening in Kashmir in India, for instance, is something that is bizarre and doesn't come up, doesn't get discussed. The last foreign minister of Bangladesh actually decided that there were no indigenous people of Bangladesh. So in one sweeping statement, she denied the existence of this entire minority community. Mujib, who was the father of the nation, at one stage made a famous statement saying, Tora Bangali hoja, you become Bangalis. Now, yeah, I can change many things about myself. I cannot change my ethnicity, I cannot change my race, but this is what is expected. In terms of this national identity, everyone is required to confirm.
I don't want to end in a situation where we sit talking here, then there is 7 minutes left for you to add comments. So I would like to suggest that the issues that we have addressed so far, if there are any of you who want to add something or put a question on this, then do it now, and then we'll move on to other issues. Don't introduce a new issue, please, but in the issues we've talked about, anyone who wants to add, comment, question. Yes, please, Diana from Arterial, which is a cultural and human rights network in Africa.
Talking to mobility, just to give some example that we have in Africa. In Benin, for example, some artists get a diplomatic passport, so they are allowed to travel with the diplomatic passport, and that helped the artists to travel. But even though, for example, you had the Index on Censorship invitation last time, and they invite a lady from Benin, her name is Zainab. She has the diplomatic passport. She has the note from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Benin to apply for a visa. But because she's a single woman, I mean, she's not married, she gets denied. She didn't get her visa, not because of the artist statue, but more because of her situation as a woman. That's also something on mobility. The good point in some region, like East Africa community or the West Africa community, is like the citizen in that region can travel easily. So it helps the market, but it's only in that region. But if, for example, a South African artist wants to travel to Mali, he needs to apply for a visa. And if he has another festival in Ivory Coast, he needs to apply for another one. In East Africa, we can apply for one single visa and you get access to Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, I think. So that also can be a good example in terms of mobility. In terms of funding, in Africa, the Ministry of Culture has a budget, but it's more for the function of the minister. It's not to fund projects, but it's more to pay the salary of the people working in. Most of the festival and the institution like us, we get funds from Global North, as it is, as you said. But now we decide also not to wait for the government to fund, but also to find another way as an artist to contribute to our own work. And another point is the sponsorship. Yes, it's true that sometimes they don't ask a lot in terms of what the return of the investment. But in some country, for example, for MTN bushfire, the now is becoming MTN. The bushfire is just another name. And we get a lot of funds for the private sector, just to give different story. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Anyone who wants to add more to this part of the debate? Okay, because then we could move on to the complexity of what we could call global domination or commercial interests in regards to artistic freedom. It links also up to how the whole convention became a convention. I mean, it started with discussions over art and culture in the trade system under the WTO, and many of you would remember that, especially France wished to introduce what they call cultural exception, that countries should be able to support financially their arts, and they should also have the right to do quota systems. So there was a lot of fights about that, and it's sort of regulated now under the convention that you have that right. But on top of that, we have a global system of corporates who are sort of living in their own world, and they're not part of any convention. So sometimes we talk about the new possibilities through globalization and internet, but there's certainly also challenges. Q, from your point of view, what are major challenges seen from your perspective, not necessarily from Korea, but as you as a curator and artist yourself?
Yes, there. I mean, I'm a practitioner, so there are always challenges. Whatever I receive funding or whatever I don't have funds and things. So, for me as a practitioner, is globalization situation. What I have to make a constructive way rather than complaining, rather than so. I don't think I can change government policy, also globalization. How can we, as an artist, change? But we can influence. We will show different way of, alternative approach. So I think so. That's why I mentioned about nationalism or globalization, or the market oriented or outcome oriented. So I think last 4 years we had a sort of pilot project. It's basically, when I met Marianne, it's a good model about ITM. Because so much driven by government, so much sort of national funding is how we make a transnational or cross-cultural network to supporting kind of emerging mid-career rather than established artists. So, kind of supporting in Asian, we call the Asian Produce Platform. So supporting 40 Asian, sort of understanding local context, research, because producers also need to understand the local context rather than only artists. Artists, producers, how nexus together, things like that. So what I believe is there are many ways to overcome challenges rather than complaining about challenges, which means how we support. This is really shame. I didn't know about UNESCO Convention 2015. It's first time. There are many ways. Also, the other way, what I want to say is, when we had less kind of mobility in domestic Korea, we had an international colleagues support our work. So when we had a Gwangju Democracy Uprising project, 2 Japanese contemporary museum commissioned us. We worked together. We just did 3 weeks in Korea, but has 2 months in other countries, things. So how you build up your own network, how you became sort of trust-based or artistic freedom-based, build up your network, how you cross-cultural, transnational perspective, you can see the future rather than me, my country, complaining government system. So that's a sort of, for me, as a practitioner, really important. And also UK-Korea season is a government money. Also stakeholders, many UK kind of sponsors, Korean sponsors really interested in very classic high London Symphony Orchestra and Wayne McCreek. It's easy to selling. Where the younger generation, capacity building, the agenda about art and disability, LGBT, also city, explore different way. There is no one raise a hand to support. So also leadership as a practitioner is important. How you support new voice. So I don't. Yeah, there are many challenges. My point is yes, but is one way is finding your alternative approach. The other one is leadership. Really, really important. So that's sort of the only way I can.
Right. I mean, and Korea is a special case in the sense that Korea made a bilateral trade agreement with the U.S. where the Hollywood producers pushed the U.S. administration to get the quota system for Korean films from, I think, from 80% down to 30%, and that's very different debate. But whenever, especially U.S. has been able to make bilateral agreements, I think they did that with Tanzania as well and New Zealand. They cannot really live up to the standards of the UNESCO convention anyway. U.S. will never sign that convention. because they believe the arts and culture should be regulated through the WTO system. Raul, in India, I mean, Bollywood as well as Hollywood are global operators, and sometimes it's being discussed as a threat to diversity. Do you see that sort of domination from global industries such as Bollywood and Hollywood, that has a negative effect on diversity or the access to show products, because sometimes they also control the distribution system?
Well, I mean, we have to face the truth that both the big budget films of Hollywood and Bollywood, when you say Bollywood, it's only the Hindi language film. They're all more or less run by the studios, which are corporates, which is where the massive budget films will come out. But there is a very strong regional film industry as well, be it in Marathi, be it in South Indian languages, which are doing equally well and which are now reaching out to audiences across the globe. Because primarily Indians are everywhere, so you have Indian films reaching out to. I could sit in Japan, I could sit in New York, but I'll still be able to access a Tamil film. Also, with Netflix and Amazon and all these online portals and YouTube, it becomes so easy for me to make a film however I want, in whatever language I want, about any topic that I want to, without any censorship, and upload it online. The budgets are much lesser, and freedom is 100%. So, I mean, I keep saying filmmakers, artists, but especially filmmakers are like those adamant kids who find their way. There's no way you can stop them. They'll just find their way.
We've seen that with Iranian filmmakers, definitely.
Absolutely.
Smuggling out films. From your perspective, this debate about globalization, domination.
I'll give you some specific examples. We had a human rights portal called BanglaRights.net, and which was supported by FCO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And during the invasion of Iraq, there were several articles which were very critical of the invasion of Iraq. And a woman from the British Council, I wasn't in the country at that time, contacted our webmaster to say, well, maybe those pieces needed to come down because it could affect future funding. Of course, he being, thinking about the organization, did it. Once he told me, I said, please put them back up again and write me an email saying that this is what had happened. So, of course, I then wrote to the British Council to say, can you please explain your funding policy? And suddenly the whole, oh, no, we're not about censorship and whatever. But in fact, funding did stop after that. That's another one. USIS, there was the director of USIS wrote to me with CCs to several people saying, considering the position you took towards the visit of President Clinton to Bangladesh, we'd been very critical during Clinton's visit. I'm surprised that you should think that the USIS would collaborate with DRIC on anything. And I have that in print. Much more recently, when we did this festival, Chobimala, of course, a similar thing happened with India, because we had shown photographs of beautiful work by children of sex workers who produced this exhibition. But the Indian embassy felt that that was not the right portrayal of India. So they withdrew their funding. That happens. In the Canadian case, this is very recent, we wanted to get Larry Towell, a very famous Magnum photographer. And when we approached them, said, well, we don't have a cultural budget, but we have a human rights budget, which is okay. It was largely about human rights. They agreed to support him with the little suggestion that he talked about Kiev, which was okay by us. He'd done good work in Kiev. But then came the statement, but he mustn't talk about Gaza. So this was the previous Gaza. Those are the things that happen. Now, the interesting thing is, and I feel, and you need to correct me if I'm wrong, that these same governments would never have the gall to make such statements in their own country. But in a country like mine, where there is this patron-client relationship, and we succumb to it in some ways, they feel they can do that. They can get away with ridiculous positions and statements they would never be able to justify. And the problem is partly ourselves. We accept it, we do not question it, we do not challenge it, and we do not take these people to task, which we should do at every point.
We're not going to talk a lot about how governments are censoring. It's already in the reports, and I already talked about that. We could talk for days about that. But the phenomenon of threats from civil society or non-state actors is increasingly something that at least I notice in my work. Very little research has been done on this. One of the few research studies have been done by the National Cultural Research Institute in Sweden. And in their research they noticed that about 30% of visual artists and writers in the past couple of years have received threats. Serious threats, less serious threats, but threats. And we're talking about Sweden. I think most artists in Western countries today are facing this, and it's an issue also with many cultural institutions. If they set up controversial exhibitions, immediately they receive threats. So threats are there. But in this panel, threats linked to self-censorship, is that an issue in Bangladesh, for instance?
Very much so. In fact, I think that is a bigger issue. We do not push enough. Of course, we have a repressive government. Of course, we have a difficult situation. But our job is to be pushing the envelope constantly. And I actually don't think the artists themselves are so holier than thou either, because I think part of the reason why people do not push is not simply safety, but because by being close to the corridors of power, you then get a few favors. And part of this giving up has to do with aligning yourself in certain ways. And I find that hugely problematic. One of the things that I mentioned 71 before, because the government has aligned itself with the freedom movement. Now, you have a slightly different position as well, where artists, by that alignment, also see themselves as being aligned to the freedom movement. So it's a complicated thing. But in terms of threats, well, this is one of 8 knife wounds I got in 1996. But then I've not been knifed in 20 years. I'm doing well.
How does it affect artistic creativity?
I think partly because much of the work that is being produced is safe work, is comfortable work. There are huge issues that need to come up, and I find it very problematic that major artists who are in a position to be challenging these things take the safe route. It's also problematic in a different way, because there are times when I would expect certain people to stand up and object. Today they're saying, let's not rock the boat, it's not a good time, maybe later. And once that happens, that censorship is a very, very insidious process.
And could you give a couple of examples of what type of issues are most problematic to address, and where you would maybe self-censor or feel that if you address these issues, then you're in trouble?
The big taboo is the military. That is the absolute no-no. You cannot talk about the military. The media will not talk about it. That's also the most dangerous. Talking about corporates, critiquing the corporates, particularly telcos, because they're big advertisers, is another one. The donor community is in some ways sacrosanct as well. You don't do that. So those are areas. But now another area has come up, which is religion. And it has become much more dangerous. And just day before yesterday, a show that I was going to do, I decided I would do a photographic exhibition inside a mosque. Now, this was considered completely impossible. I thought it would be difficult, but I actually managed to convince the mosque to hold this show. And I produced a body of work. I convinced them they must allow women to enter the mosque, non-Muslims to enter the mosque, and on that basis I produced this work. Then it was the government, the Awami League, that put pressure on the mosque committee, which then felt uncomfortable, and now that show is not going to happen inside the mosque. We've come to a compromise. It'll happen in the field next to the mosque, so maybe.
Why would the government put pressure?
Because the government is now trying to appease the Islamic Party. I mean, it's a government that's vulnerable. It doesn't have a genuine mandate. It was not elected. Now, the elections are coming up. They want to essentially get the Islamic vote as well. So, and that has had huge ramifications in many ways. The fact that the Islamists have been able to get away with so much of this is because the government has turned a blind eye to them in many situations.
And these are exactly the kind of trends we also see in Europe, with several what we would normally call right-wing governments appealing to national feelings and actually attacking artists in the open, that they shouldn't address this and this and this. We also see the religious right-wing groups coming up. We saw the case in Russia with Pussy Riot, probably the most well-known case, with combination of state interest and the Orthodox Church. Rahul, in India, is there anything that echoes what we're talking about?
Well, you know, especially film, if I go ahead and write an article for an English magazine or an English novel, people won't bother much because the outreach won't be much. But if it's a film, it releases nationally, in villages, in towns and in cities and across. So film surely does receive a lot of threat. Recently, we were talking last night, and this really big, very popular filmmaker, Sanjay Bansali, who makes massive budget films, he was filming in Rajasthan about Padmavati, a historical figure, and her love story, which is, I think, adapted from a play. It didn't even happen. But this small political group in Rajasthan came on sets and disrupted the camera, disrupted the sets, and the shooting had to be stalled. They had not read the script. Sanjay was filming quietly, and he had all the permissions from the local police and the local bodies, but still the shooting had to be stalled. And so I'm pretty sure, like tomorrow, if I want to make a film, and this film that we want to film later in this year, there's a small sequence on the 1993 Hindu-Muslim riots, but a lot of people who read the script, they're like, okay, do you really need this? Do we want to show this? That is surely, and if I want the money to make the film, I have to keep in mind as to how I'm going to show that particular scene. So for sure, there is self-censorship while I'm writing, while I'm shooting.
Q? You want to add something to this?
No.
Because if you don't, we have very little time left. Yes, Diana? Could we have the mic?
Just the one interesting case that I want to share with you in terms of the globalization as well. In Kenya, I don't know if you remember, in February there is a video clip published on the YouTube, and the Kenya Classification Board decided to ban the video clip because it showed the LGBT. And the LGBT, according to the Kenya law, is against the cultural value. We talk about national value, but it's it's the same issue. And because it was published on the YouTube, the Kenya government cannot ban it properly. So they asked the Google to stop it. And that was a little become an issue in somehow, because Kenya was really upset, like Google need to stop. And Google replied that YouTube doesn't belong to them. It's an independent platform, so it's not their responsibility. They don't have the authority to do that. So that's also an interesting case that happened in Kenya. In terms of self-censorship and the cultural policy, most of the time when you read the cultural policy in country is to promote the culture as a development tool. But unfortunately, there is actually in Africa, there is non-law who protect the artistic freedom. So you have a lot of law talking about access, infrastructure, participation. But when an artist gets trouble, there is no law to protect the artist from the public, from the authority, from the religions, the traditional authority. So I think when you talk about reshaping the cultural policy, we all also need to have a law who really protect the artists as a human rights defender, and also for the work that they do to the social development of the country. And that's why the self-censorship come, because the artists know that if they get trouble, no one will protect them, even their peer. So it's better to follow, sometimes it's invisible law, it's the society who give the law, and we have to follow that if you don't get trouble. Yeah.
Well, I just got what the moderator would normally call the dream scenario, because we were allowed to continue another 10 minutes, which is fabulous. Thank you so much for that, Daniel. Anyone else who want to add something to this current debate? Interesting what you said about Google and YouTube. You know, for a period, YouTube was closed down in Pakistan, and then the Pakistani government made a deal with YouTube to sort of, you know, do some kind of self-sanitation. And we don't know, there's no transparency of this, but obviously the way that social media is being used in YouTube and Google works twice, especially with Facebook also, that many of the states today monitor artists out there on YouTube. So you may put up your work outside your country, but it also becomes part of the court cases as a proof. And we saw that very much during the so-called Arab Spring, how the governments were monitoring protesters and then put it back in them. So it's a dual spear. One thing I do want to address here also, because one of the rights is the rights for remuneration. And we know that there's a lot of violations, and a lot of governments are violating also copyrights, and we can talk about that for days. But you told me earlier today one very concrete example of copyright infringement that you experienced.
Yeah, we have. I mentioned that 1971 is a very big period in Bangladesh and very close to our hearts. Now we happen to have probably the finest archives of images of 1971. The people who use these the most are the Bangladesh government. In pretty much all their promotional material, a huge number of our images are being wantonly used. Now, okay, we could take them to court, but the government is a big entity, we're a small entity. But it's not simply that. We do not have sufficient separation between the judiciary and the executive. So simply taking it to court itself is not enough. I mean, it didn't happen. In 2010, we had a show called Crossfire and Extrajudicial Killings, and the government tried to close it down. At that time, there was a huge public outcry, and we had tremendous public support. As a result, the court was sufficiently empowered to rule or take a position against the government. That doesn't usually happen. So when you have the most powerful entity in the country being the most blatant infringer, it becomes very, very difficult. And so there really is very little concept of copyright protection. There is also, some of it also is lack of knowledge. There is this assumption that if something's on the net, it can be taken. Yeah? To the extent that people take it and credit the source as being the internet. It's like saying I got it from the air. But major newspapers will take things and say source internet. But in practice, that has become a huge problem for us. And of course, once something goes into the public domain and is used in that manner, it becomes very, very difficult. And for artists who depend upon their royalties for their living, it really becomes very, very difficult. So we don't really know what it is, but I'm told that there are methods. We talked about this earlier. Contact Press Images is a US agency that has come up with a very interesting model. They've hired a law firm, and their agreement with the law firm is that they split the profits if they can get compensation. So they don't pay anything up front. The law firms, it is in the law firm's incentive, interest, to litigate and get things. So what they do is they will provide all the information about infringements. The law firm does all the research, and because they've done it, they're now pretty good at it. If they lose money, it's made their investment. If they gain money, they do a three-way split, 1/3 to the artist, 1/3 to the agency, 1/3 to the lawyer. It might be a model to follow.
I would actually like to come back to one issue when it comes to threats, and that is, if you, as an artist,
about it, because there's been some quite positive recognition of the importance that actually there is something capricious about the way that the police operate, that they are exposing themselves to potential judicial review. So there is a sort of political structure in place around this, that an illegal structure that they are very conscious of, and they are very open at this stage to having a conversation
after the new order stepped down and the reform era, but we don't really know when it's applied until it's happening. So it's kind of problematic for us as artists, because sometimes we're wondering whether we will get a problem when we are doing something, but we don't know until it's happening. Like for my own experience, I organized like LGBT film festival in Malang. It's a small town in East Java, and actually it's become a problem because it's a kind of pressure from some of organization, because it's a sensitive issue, and all the cultural center who's projected the film is also got a problem. But then we become a mediation between the Jakarta Art Council and the representative of those community leader. Right. So the censorship actually is, I would say now, is getting more freedom for us to express our opinion and perspective through the arts. But of course there is still that some, maybe is what the words to say is conservatives, say that we have also to respect the local wisdom and the national identity, like what we discussed. Also to maintain the good names of the local Indonesian or something like that. So it's kind of dilemma whether we want to voice what our opinion as a personal, or to maintain the national identity as one of the citizens.
And we previously also heard the problem of addressing religion or non-religion.
Yes.
Right.
It's quite a sensitive issue when we come to this religious issue, particularly these days. For me, I come from the Indonesian Chinese family, so it's always not easy for myself as a minority, but I'm obsessed with the issues as an identity. So I'm glad also to come here when I heard about national identity. I read Amin Malouf, what the elements to shape us as a person, either political identity, like Indians speak Hindu or something. Like for me, I don't speak Chinese at all, but I was born.
To stop here before I invite Danielle back to finalize this session. But I hope this has been at least a start, and please continue discuss amongst each other and with the panelists, because there are many issues that could still be addressed. So first of all, thank you very much to this great panel, thank you for those of you who stayed. We know who left the room, and we noticed. We will take notes. Danielle, will you say a few words at the end here? You will? Oh, I can. Okay. Well, in that case, I should probably put forward my thanks and gratitude to UNESCO for hosting this, to Denmark for funding it, and mostly for all of you who came here, who are all experts in this field. Certainly, the discussions will continue tomorrow. Some of the people who are here will also discuss how UNESCO can move on with the convention on training modules in regards to artistic freedom. It's certainly one of these issues that are very controversial worldwide today. And the risk is, of course, that we stereotype countries or cultures when we say these people do this. I apologize if I did that. I would love to discuss that further. I agree on your analysis, but that's a different point. But we must be able to talk about it. And I think there's been some openings today that we can discuss it. I'm very happy that the Vietnamese delegate stayed on because we need to be in the same room. We need to be able to talk about it. We don't have to be, I mean, we don't agree on anything here. Probably we'll have a lot of disagreements on many issues if we talk. But we have to have that dialogue. That is important. So thank you very much and have a great evening.